One representative of the United States Navy in the naval interrogations that took place at Fort Hunt, who is with us today, and that's Mr. Angus McLean Thurmer. Mr. Thurmer, please.
I don't have anything to. I don't have anything so widespread as all this Army stuff, and or serious. Anything from V1s to your family being torn apart. But I did a little interrogation here of a Navy person, namely the captain of a U-boat. 93. How do you know? And I don't think that was the number, but I didn't think he'd know. And so I said, we were lying out in the grass here, and I was passing myself off as Lieutenant Angus McLean. Well, at least I knew how to spell my right name. Anyway, my hat was beside me, and I had my calling card in it, which said Angus McLean Thurmer. So I was in the middle of the interrogation. I looked down and saw that. But anyway, I talked to this fellow, and he said he was the U-boat captain. Well, that's big stuff, you know. And so I said, how'd you get that way, and how do you get out of the, how'd you get rescued? Well, he said, I saw something through the periscope, and so I thought, I'm going to go upstairs and take a look myself. So lifted open the hatch, popped up, and so a whole big, bloody great Suzama type wave came down, filled the submarine, and sank it with all hands, except the captain. The captain is supposed to be the last man, you know. He said, I can't tell you. He was watching the Greyhound buses go by like this. He thought he was going to Miami, but I should assure you he wasn't. And so he said, well, I was a midshipman on Hitler's yacht. Well, I got interested in that. I said, yes, it was called the Grilla. And I think that means monkey, doesn't it? Doesn't it?
Grasshopper.
Right. Oh, what?
Grasshopper.
Grasshopper. Well, what's the difference? And he said, there we were up in the harbor, I guess it was Cuxhaven or something. And all of a sudden we had a visitor. We have, incidentally, the German Kriegsmarine was not very Nazi. I mean, they weren't, nobody was going to get hanged for saying something, but they weren't very Nazi. And so they had a visitor. Who was he? He was the little-loved Dr. Goebbels. And he came aboard with his little party, and they came down. And the chief engineer had his eye on him, accidentally. And he saw that Dr. Goebbels leaned back against a spring-activated vent. And so the chief engineer said, down below, chief engineer, lay down, open number 10, now! Whack! Up came this spring-activated thing, hit Goebbels in the fanny, jumped. Anyway, so the chief engineer, when he sees his successful operation, he's like, here, Reichsminister, this way, gangway, board arch to the medical room, and down there with Goebbels' party around them, and they get in the medical room there, and the doctor says, yeah, here, Reichsminister, if you would, as we say in the Navy, lower away, I will inspect the wound. And so all of Goebbels' party looked at the walls, not walls, sorry, the bulkheads and overhead. And they looked away like this, and lowered away, and the doctor said, yeah, Reichsminister, my prescription is a tot of rum for all hands. And so they went upstairs. I guess everybody got a tot of rum, I don't know. But this party and this chief engineer, for some reason, they were invited 2 or 3 weeks later to a reception in Berlin. And where were they being received in this receiving line? Goebbels' house. And they go through the line, and as the chief engineer approaches the wife of Dr. Goebbels, she looks ahead 2 or 3 persons, and she says, "I know you. You were the fella who was so helpful to my husband in the matter of the spring valve." And so that was the end of that, although I did correspond with the officer later. His name was Klaus Barkston, known as Klausmause, or Klausmaus. I exchanged letters with him later in Bremen. Now that is the end of naval interrogation down here.
Often when we interview the monitors and the interrogators who served at 1142, we'll get names of prisoners. And we'll ask our volunteer, Dan Gross, can you please raise your hand? Who's done a lot of historical research for us at the archives. And in fact, we authenticate the stories by saying, say Mr. Thurmer's name on the interrogation reports or monitoring reports. So the names of most of these men are on the documents that we're searching through in the archives. Next person on our list is Mr. George Weidinger.
Veterans of Fort Hunt, honored guests, Vernon Beach, and members of the National Park Service, thank you for making this meeting possible. My prepared notes do not do justice to the enormous and emotional job the National Park Service has done. My name is George Weidinger. I am grateful and honored to be able to attend this reunion. I came to this country from Vienna, Austria in 1939 after living with the Germans for 1.5 years. My service in the U.S. Army started in 1943, stationed at Camp Stewart, Georgia with the 795th Anti-Aircraft Battalion. On November 5th, 1943, I became a U.S. citizen in Savannah, Georgia. I had a difficult time to get transferred to the military intelligence and arrived at Fort Hunt in November of 1944. My duties were to monitor various cells and record conversations that may be of interest. Early in 1945, I was issued a special courier pass, and for 2 weeks I carried a leather pouch containing secret papers handcuffed to my wrist from Fort Hunt to the Pentagon. I was discharged on August 1st, 1945. I had little contact with anyone on the post, as my wife and I lived off the post in Alexandria, Virginia. I was fortunate that Captain M.I. Corey, the medical officer at Fort Hunt, was kind enough to drive me to work as well as take me home in the evening. At this time, I do not recollect what Fort Hunt looked like or any special event that would be of interest. In 1968, we took our 3 daughters to visit Mount Vernon and stopped on the way to find Fort Hunt. However, nobody we asked knew where it was. In no way would this reunion be complete without remembering the wives of the servicemen. I especially want to thank my wife of 65 years, Nina, for being with me during all my Army days. Thank you.
The lives of these men after World War II took many different paths. So some are professors at colleges. There are lawyers present, men who worked in business as well as public servants. Next gentleman was an ambassador to the United States, joined the State Department and the Foreign Service. became the ambassador, or the country's emissary to various countries. I'd like to introduce Ambassador John Gunther Dean.
I'm going to confine my comments to 1142. What Pince said about Colonel Walker, who was the commander, was very important for my entire life. He set the example here at 1142. I was 18 and a half years of age. I didn't know what to do with myself in life. And he was an example that I wanted to do something, serve the nation, serve the community. As a matter of fact, later in life, Mr. Averill Harriman, who was a friend of my late father, said, why don't you go into banking? And I've learned here at 1142 that serving others, doing some good for somebody else, whether it's in the Army, Navy, Air Force, whether it's in diplomacy, whether it's in the community, whether it's helping old people, young people, is very satisfying and a very fulfilling life. I learned at 1142, you can only lead by example. We were carrying out our duties with the various prisoners. I'll mention one case in particular. In a way, in line with the convention of the Geneva Convention on Prisoners. We were living up to the great reputation of the United States. Nobody could criticize us when we talked with prisoners who were trying to win them over. We were not trying to do things which were against the law. I'm going to give you one example, which is, and maybe keep the other one for tomorrow. There was a German submarine that left in January of 1945 for Japan. It's German U-boat 234. On board of that submarine was uranium oxide. Do you know what that is? That's what's being used when you want to go and make atomic bombs. The last gift of Mr. Hitler to the Japanese. The war was going to go on. On board of that ship were German generals, Japanese high officers, and scientists. And one scientist was by the name of Heinz Schlicke. He had come from Peenemünde. On the 6th of May or so, as the Germans surrendered, the war is coming to an end, the captain of that U-boat, Captain Fehler, said, I'm surrendering only to the Americans. Whereupon the Japanese, on their way to Japan, that U-boat, at the height of Uruguay, these people were shipped to 1142, except the Japanese, when he surrendered, Fehler committed harikari. And among the people coming to 1142 was Heinz Schlicke, the inventor of infrared. We in the United States did not have infrared. All I was good for, and Pince and Lachman, we were in the same barracks for 2 years. We could push the button, but ever so often, Colonel Walker would say, Dean, take this guy out for a ride on the horses we had here, take him to town and have a cup of coffee with him. We were trying to use seduction, be nice to people so they work with us. Not trying to torture, but trying to be nice in order to get something done. Now, Schlicke said, yes, I was at Peenemünde, and I have infrared, but my wife and my 2 children, little ones, they're in Germany, and they are now in a zone not friendly. Whereupon I was asked by the colonel to take prisoners after the war had come to an end in May, on a ship back to Germany. I was sent to Kiel, which was the British zone, and there, I'm no big hero, it was all laid on. I went into what was the Russian zone, and I got his wife in civilian clothes. I got his wife and 2 children out, and when I brought them back to the American zone, they were brought to the States. I went back to 1142 here. They built a laboratory for him, and he gave us infrared. It was not torture or anything. We were working with him to try to find ways of learning what we can learn from others by working with him according to a certain ethical code. I might say we also tried to get Dr. Hertz, but the Russians got there first. But here at 1142, we had Dr. Hertz's son, but he bombed out, he was 0. The Russians built a fabulous laboratory for him in the Crimea. That's what some of the things we did at 1142. But we did it with a certain amount of respect and justice for adversaries, for potential adversaries, for prisoners. We were living up to the U.S. good image.
Thank you.
And I would like to say one thing. Because of that experience in 1142, I didn't go into banking as they wanted me, and they had it all set up to work for Baring Brothers in London and make millions of dollars, but I wanted to learn and how could I serve the country. And I therefore, as an immigrant to the United States, as a little boy, I asked to join the Foreign Service. And I will tell you what I learned here at 1142, that decency and honesty is what we stand for. This is a very important message now to bring out, that it's not only the might by itself doesn't make right, but you also have to stand for a certain number of things. I learned this here at 1142, and I will tell you tomorrow maybe, because the other guest I was involved in, up to my eyeballs, was a man who played a major role
Thank you, Ambassador.
in U.S.-Soviet relations.
Ambassador Dean.
And he was here on his own volition. It has a major impact on U.S. relations with the communist world in the second half of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century.
Thank you.
And it will be tomorrow. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we are running a little short on time, so I'll have to ask all of the remaining panelists to please keep your comments relatively short. Ambassador Dean has mentioned science and the importation of German technology as being a focus in the last years here at Post Office Box 1142. Eminent scientists are going to be speaking now, including Dr. Henry Cohen, who after serving here for the United States government would become a professor at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dr. Cohen.
Thank you, Tom, and thank all of you at the Park Service who have made this event possible. A considerable effort. Can you hear me?
No.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay, let me say first of all that I can't possibly cover everything of interest in the 3 minutes I have. So take down my name, which is Henry Kolm, K-O-L-M as in Mike, and go to my personal website, henrykolm.com. That's all. www.henrykolm.com, and you will see a complete account of what I did here and in the Boston Harbor and during the Project Paperclip and during the war in general. So I will be brief and I will mention only what I consider really important. The important function of our group here at Feuer Box 1142 was to brainstorm the systematic destruction of the German war machine by surgical bombing of key points. You've all heard, probably, I assume, the Schweinfurt ball bearing works. Well, no war machine will run long without a new ball bearing, be it airplanes or tanks or trucks. And the list of surgical bombing points for Germany is longer than is generally known. I just wrote down the ones that come to memory. Schweinfurt ball bearings, the Ruhr Valley power dams that supplied most of the power, Bremerhaven where they made U-boat submarines, Bremen itself, Siemens and Schuckert, Peenemünde, where the V-rockets were invented, built and launched. And by the way, V1 stands for Vergeltungswaffe 1, which means revenge weapon 1. Peenemünde, which were very well wanted, the Paris railroad station, and great crossings in the countryside around Paris where they reloaded things after we bombed the stations. Steyr, Heilbronn, Sinsheim, Leitz, Wolfsburg, which you all know from the VW factory. But one of the interesting, oh yes, I also refer you to a book by Mitchener, called Space, which describes the paper project problem. And what happened here is that one day General Bissell called us together. He was G2 in the Pentagon, and he was the boss of General Warner, I believe. And anyway, he said, I've decided to do something which is illegal. I will sneak German scientists into this country who otherwise will wind up in Russia or England or France before it's too late. And I'm unable to get permission from the State Department. It was the time that Roosevelt had just died and Truman hadn't quite taken over yet. And so he sent a group of us to a small island in Boston Harbor, which was under military control at the time, to bring these German scientists in illegally with troop ships. Troop ships were coming home in great numbers, and we would board them before the pilot from Boston Harbor boarded the ship, and bring them to that island illegally. And we brought some 300 or 400 people, including the whole crew of Peenemünde. Then, when it got eventually legalized, we moved the whole group back to P.O. Box. So I was at P.O. Box 1142 from when it first started in 42 until it was terminated in 45 with a 9 months or 10 months interruption in Boston Harbor when paperclip started. And it is General Bissell who risked his, not his life, but he may have risked his life in jail, that bringing in hundreds of people illegally. But the most important thing was identifying key points that would disrupt and immobilize the German military machine, shorten the war, save numerous lives, and gave us personally a feeling of great satisfaction because they killed most of my family.
Thank you, Dr. Koh. Dr. Combs' interview that we did at his home lasted about 6 hours. And one of the things about his interview that is so compelling is that example after example after example of military needs and how the intelligence was acquired here in 1142 met the strategic and tactical needs of the country were all found here in Fort Strong in Boston. Thank you very much, Dr. Combs. Next on our list is Mr. Eric Kramer of New York.
Very little has been said about the actual mechanics, how the interrogations worked. A prisoner or a German scientist would be taken to a room and asked questions and being asked for information. But another group of us, and I was one of those, would sit all day long with earphones on our heads, listening to the conversations between the German prisoners. When a person who had been interrogated would be taken back to his room, where he usually had one or two roommates, they would say, well, what did they ask you today? What did you tell them? What didn't you tell them? And then conversations would ensue that we would listen to and record, where things came out that had never come out during the interrogations. And one of the things that I can't vouch for, but that we were told that during one of these listen-ins and subsequent translations, we were instrumental in sinking the German U-boat that was talked about previously. That's it.
May I add one remark? I think it's noteworthy that we got more information out of a German general over a game of chess or ping pong than present-day interrogators get by threats and tortures and all sorts of other things.
Pardon me, it's, the next person would be Mr. Richard Kleeman, who we just found 3 weeks ago.
皆さん、いらっしゃい。I'm using that small device to let you know that contrary to most of what you've heard from up here about 1142 on the German side, I was on the Japanese side. I was quite surprised when I got all the materials about this reunion that they seemed to concentrate almost entirely on interrogation of prisoners of German prisoners of war, because my only contacts here, of course, were with Japanese prisoners of war. Now, I'm sorry I haven't got anything quite so dramatic to report to you as you just heard about the Japanese, but my stay at 1142 was moderately uneventful. I remember interrogating a Japanese admiral, but I'm damned if I can remember if he revealed the secret plans of the emperor to us. I don't think I can claim responsibility for winning the war. But what I did want to confess to you is the way I got to what I did. I was a first lieutenant in the MIS, and my confession is that I went to Harvard, and in my senior year, I took a double course in Japanese from Professors Reischauer and Elisea. At least Reischauer's name should be familiar to you because he was our ambassador to Japan. And the line in those days was that the optimists were learning Japanese, the pessimists were learning Chinese. So I guess I was an optimist, and I learned it up to a point. But my recollections of 1142 are quite hazy and modest, probably because I didn't record anything very dramatic because it was also classified. But I do want to thank the Interior Department and the National Park Service for this really great reunion. It's been a terrific experience, and we have been extremely well treated by the various officers. And I think beyond that, I haven't got anything dramatic to say.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Tomorrow, Brandon Bies, who you've heard many of the veterans speak about, park ranger and cultural resource manager here at Glen Echo Park, and has conducted many of the oral histories of the veterans. We, among the first two veterans that we found are in the next three speakers. We've called upon George Mandel to speak for the National Park Service in this project many times, and we'd like to ask Dr. Mandel to tell us a few words about his memories of Fort Hunt.
Thank you very much. I'd like to briefly tell you the role that 1142 played for me and my experiences here. I was relatively lucky compared to all the other things that happened during that terrible time. I was a student in chemistry, getting my bachelor's degree when Pearl Harbor broke out, and we were impressed that we should stay studying science because this would be important for the war effort. So I finished with my bachelor's degree, at which point I was inducted into the military and was immediately sent into the infantry, which surprised me because I thought that having been deferred for 2 years to learn chemistry, I would not be able to practice much of that in the infantry. But the army realized that I spoke German, and it was decided that perhaps this could be of interest to the military effort. Because of the fact that I've been speaking nothing but German for about 12 years of my life, I was sent to Ohio State University to learn German. And after that, in the period of Camp Ritchie, I was sent to 1142. This was an amazing experience for me. I was 20 years old at the time, and I was asked to interrogate scientists and engineers and technical people about what they had done that was special. One of the major controversies at the time was the fact that suddenly our jet fighters could no longer keep up with the German jet fighters. And here we always had our nice propeller planes, and the Germans had jet engines. So my job was to get interrogation material about the jet engine, even though the jet engine had been discovered or invented in the United States, but we didn't use it in our military program much. So the importance of the jet engine cannot be minimized because we had air superiority during the latter part of the war. If we had lost that because of the fact that our planes were no longer competitive with the German planes, this could have been a disaster from point of view of the way the war changed. I was also able to talk to some of the individuals from the German rocket business, including Werner von Braun, and he told us that in addition to the V1 and the V2, they were now working on a weapon that would be able to travel 3,000 miles. The realization of the fact that they could have a weapon that would hit America would have been extremely frightening and could have changed the war. I also was asked to interrogate somebody who had been talking about the purification of uranium. And this was a scientist who had been involved in the German project regarding uranium, and I didn't know why this was of such interest. You have to realize this happened before Hiroshima, and nobody understood at the time the power of what an atomic bomb could do. Fortunately, the Germans went totally on the wrong path with respect to uranium purification and got nowhere. But had they been able to build an atom bomb before us, that also could have had dramatic effects on history. Interestingly enough, that same scientist I met again several years later after the war, because both of us had continued to work in science at that point, and we met at a conference, and at one of the social functions, I saw somebody that looked very familiar, and he looked at me and he realized the same thing. And he turned to his wife and said, "My God, there's my former prison warden." Well, living in 1142 was an amazing experience for me, and I thought I was extremely lucky that it could happen. You have to realize that at that time, 1142 was in a very quiet, rural area, except for the fact that the military, every morning at 5 a.m., blew off a cannon which shocked the whole neighborhood. And the other thing that I thought was amazing was that 1142 was the only name that we could use because everything was so secret. But if you arrived at, say, Union Station in Washington, D.C., and needed to take a taxi to 1142, all taxi drivers would immediately tell you, 1142, that's Fort Hunt, isn't it?
Thank you, Dr. Mango. The very first veteran who we contacted in this project was Fred Michel. And I think he has a special place in many of the staff's hearts. We'd like to ask Mr. Michel to say a few words, please.
Well, George and I worked together in the same group, and I want to change the pace now. Talk a little bit of different story. And the fact is that my wife and I met at the USA, here in Alexandria, and we're still married today. After 16 years. I was going to tell you a different story, but this is very important. That's it.
Next in line would be Mr. Peter Weiss.
I was drafted in the spring of 1944. I went to Fort Bragg Field Artillery Basic, and from there I was sent to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. And after a couple of months there, I was called in by the colonel, and the colonel said, "Weiss, it says on your record that you speak German." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Say something in German." So remembering my Goethe, I said, "Wer leitet so spät durch Nacht und Wind, das ist der Vater mit seinem Kind." He said, "That's enough." And so I went to Camp Ritchie. And strangely enough, last Monday, in going through the papers that my wife and I have to get rid of after living in a house for 47 years and moving to an apartment, I found a whole batch of letters which my parents had saved, which I sent to them from Ritchie and Hunt. And I'm just going to share this little morsel with you. It says, Thursday I got a letter from the grandparents including a welcome money order for $5. This time, Großmama included the receipt instead of the coupon. She has now exhausted all the possibilities for sending a money order the right way and should know the correct procedure for the future. So from Camp Ritchie, I was sent, like many of us, to Fort Hunt. And one of the things that is totally different about Fort Hunt today from 1142 then is the food. So I want to take this opportunity to thank the Park Service for really this marvelous hospitality that they have bestowed on us. However, in mentioning food, therein lies a short tale. One day, Arno and another friend who's not here and I did something thoroughly illegal, and we went out on the highway to hitchhike to Washington. And a car stopped with two very nice ladies inside, and they said, "Well, you know, how things are here?" And we said, "They're fine." He said, "They're taking good care of you?" We said, "Yes." And then the woman who was driving said, "How's the food?" And we said, "Terrible." And she said, "I'm going to have to tell the general about that." And we said, "Which general?" She said, "I'm Mrs. Eisenhower." Well, I have a bunch of monitoring
boring stories, but I'll just, in the interest of time, tell you one. We really had a very competent and nice officer corps here. At least they were nice to us. I don't know how they were to the inmates. But one day, they didn't live up entirely to performance standards, and that was when the Japanese military attaché to Berlin was coming through 1142 on his way back to Tokyo. And they had done some research on him, and they found that he was very fond of bourbon. So they laid on a dinner for him. And we were listening in on the theory that he was going to say some very important things. And so it started out with, would you like some bourbon, General? Yes, please. And there was a little small talk, and 5 minutes later, would you like some more bourbon, General? Yes, please. And then would you tell us, about Japan's plans for the rest of the war? No, cannot. Would you like some more bourbon? Yes, please. After a while, the speech of his hosts became a little blurred. And they began to tell him things that they were not supposed to tell him. And under a pretext, we, lowly PFCs, had to go in and break up the meeting. Okay, quickly, one of the things that I did, that some of us did, was sense of the mail, going out and coming in. And at one point, we put together a little booklet called, in a very bad pun, Remembrance of Things Past, P-A-S-S-E-D. I can't read any of them to you because they're mostly in German, and I don't want to inflict that on the non-German speakers. But I can tell you, I looked at this today on the plane coming down, and I left all the way from New York to Washington. I'll just share one thing with you. On the last page are a few awkward attempts at English. I don't know whether this is coming in or going out, but one of them says, at 6:10 tinkles my alarm watch. I want to end by underscoring what Ambassador Dean has said. I think it is crucially important for everyone to realize the tremendous difference in the way prisoners were treated and interrogated when we were all here at Fort Hunt, and the way it is being done now. And I think it is a challenge to all of us as American citizens. We can't leave it to the New York Times to restore to the honor of America the respect for morality and law that Ambassador Dean was speaking about. Thank you.
Our final speaker today is Professor Arno Mehr. If I could beg his indulgence for a moment. Dr. Henry Combe said he had one sentence to add to the history that he had told us before. Please, Dr. Combe.
Thank you, Sam for allowing me to say this important sentence. If U-234, 238, not 234, had gotten through to Japan and Captain Heinz Fehler hadn't surrendered to the US because of the good treatment he expected and received, our Air Force pilots would have been fighting kamikaze pilots flying V-1 rockets instead of propeller airplanes. Imagine what that would have meant.
And again, our final speaker is Dr. Merritt, please.
To begin with, I think we can all agree on one thing, and that is that the brain may be willing, but not the flesh. So I'll be brief. The first thing is, as a refugee and then sort of elevated to the status of exile, I did consider World War II and my service in it as necessary. I did not consider it necessarily a good war because we abused that term, and we've fought many wars since, which in my judgment did not have the same degree of necessity. The second thing is that as a historian, I'm of course incredibly suspicious of recollections and of memories and of forgettings. All things considered, what you've heard today is a pack of lies. As I said to some of my friends here, I do agree with Freud and Nietzsche, and that is that if we remembered everything, our brains would explode, and to the extent to which we do remember things, it's incredibly selective. And this gets me to my third point. Peter and I had one and the same experience, in the sense that we were picked up on the highway, not by 2, but by 3 women. It was raining cats and dogs. The lady in the back moved to the front. In those days, they didn't have cup seats. It was the benches. So that the 3 of us, because Leslie Wilson from Amarillo, Texas, was with us, should be able to sit there, and they would take us to Union Station. Peter remembers that the woman driving said, "I'd have to tell the general," and that she said, "I'm Mrs. Eisenhower," or General Eisenhower. That's a pack of lies. The reason I say it's a pack of lies is because Leslie Wilson and I have a letter from General Eisenhower, which was a response to a letter that we sent to Mamie. When Leslie, who was from Amarillo, all of a sudden turned to me and he said, "Good God, they said Mamie. She's from Amarillo. That must be Mrs. Eisenhower." We trembled. And Leslie decided that the best thing to do was a preemptive or preventive strike, because we'd done something incredibly illegal. We'd gone out there and we'd thumbed the ride and give away the position where we were. And 5 days later, we were summoned to the commander of the post, I think it's called 1142 Fort Hunt. He was practically trembling, and he handed us a letter that had just come from the Pentagon, and the letter read, "Dear Staff Sergeant Wilson, and dear Corporal Mayor, my wife Mamie is down with a cold. She has asked me to answer your very kind letter. We invariably get enormous pleasure out of picking up fine-looking soldiers, etc." Leslie and I did, oof, but we'd gotten away with it, and I turned to Leslie and I said, "Eisenhower is going to run for president."
How do we know that that was the truth?
That concludes this program for this afternoon. I'd like to pass the microphone on to Vince Santucci, the Chief Park Ranger of the George Washington Memorial Parkway. Again, a final round of applause, please, for our veterans.
How do we know that that was the truth?
That concludes this program for this afternoon. I'd like to pass the microphone on to Vince Santucci, the Chief Park Ranger of the George Washington Memorial Parkway. Again, a final round of applause, please, for our veterans.